even though I work in this space, I still have ADHD. So I get it. I'm not somebody who's come into this space and go, oh, this is all so easy. Like, why aren't you doing this? It's easy to cancel stuff. It's easy to look at your finances. Yeah, it's 100% not that easy, but some things are. I totally understand. And even myself, like I still get myself into these situations where I have been paying for stuff for months and haven't used it, or I struggle to cancel things. It's hard. And I still do, the impulsive spending. These days, I'm much more aware of it and I know how to get out of that spiral. And that's what I hope to teach people. It's not that you're never going to impulsively spend before. It's not that you're never going to forget subscriptions. You've got ADHD. This is going to happen. But it's getting out of that shame spiral. It's getting out of that spending spiral that is super important rather than trying to be perfect.
Welcome to Successful with ADHD. I'm Brooke Schnittman. Let's get started. Today, I have Tina Mathams from the ADHD Accountant on Instagram. I'm sure a lot of you know her as that. She is a financial educator and a mother of two. She is an autistic and ADHD accountant. She owns an accounting firm in Australia, so it's bright and early for her as we record here today, and works with ADHDers all over the world, helping them with their finances. Warm welcome, Tina.
Hi, thank you for having me. This is an absolute dream to be on your podcast, so I am so excited.
It's so nice meeting Instagram friends in real life.
Yeah,
real
it is
life,
really nice.
I put in
real
quotes.
life, yeah.
So Australia is one of my favorite places to go. I studied abroad there for 5 months at Sydney. Loved it. People were so nice. Loved the accents. Loved the weather. So I'm super jealous. Haven't been back there in about 20 years.
Oh, wow. It is. It's a really beautiful place to live. Very lucky.
Absolutely. So I knew that you had ADHD, hence your Instagram handle, but I didn't realize that you also were autistic. Is that a more recent diagnosis?
It is. And I've started already identifying as autistic because before I started the process, I pretty much knew anyway. My son is autistic and ADHD, and we are very, very similar. So I'm not technically diagnosed yet. I'm still going through the process, but it's very, very unlikely that it's not going to come out with a diagnosis. So I thought, start identifying as that already.
Absolutely. Now, do you have an official ADHD diagnosis?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Okay. Gotcha. And it's so interesting because I'm finding that a lot of people are realizing the ADHD first and then the autism. And I know that with autism, approximately 75% of people who have autism also have ADHD.
Oh, yeah. Wow. That's high.
But it's fascinating that so many people get diagnosed with the ADHD first. I'm curious, what led you to get the ADHD diagnosis?
So that was my son. Before I got diagnosed, I had a psychologist tell me that I had high functioning anxiety, which I was stoked with. I thought, that is the answer to all my problems. Hooray. Because it made so much sense, right? As I researched it, I was like, this is me. When I started treating that, things that I thought would get better didn't. So I knew in my heart that wasn't it. There was something else, but I didn't know what it was. And I started noticing anxiety symptoms in my son. So I approached his teachers at the time and said, this is what I'm thinking. Is there, any background at school that you can help me with? And they said, look, take him to a pediatrician. We think there might be some processing things there. He's not quite processing things. He's very delayed in his responses and things like that, which, considering he'd been in that classroom for a year, I was like, this was all new to me. So that was a bit of a shock. Ended up getting him to a pediatrician, went through all the process. He came out with the diagnosis of autism, ADHD, primarily inattentive ADHD as well, which I didn't know was a thing. And there was a few other things in there as well. The autism diagnosis wasn't as hard to get my head around. Like I thought back to things. I'm like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense for him. The ADHD, because in my brain, like a lot of people's brain, I thought that was the disruptive child, running around, bouncing off the walls at
The
school. And I
hyperactive.
thought, yeah, I thought if that was him, surely his teachers would have told me, he's not, even though he's very explosive at home and all these emotions and all that kind of stuff. I was like, surely if that was happening at school, I would have known. And then the inattentive, I was like, I didn't even know there was different presentations of ADHD. So I researched a lot just to help him. I thought if I'm going to help him with this, I need to know what it is. During that research, however, I realized that a lot of things sounded like me and my childhood. I didn't even know adults could have ADHD. I didn't know that carried through. I thought it was literally just a thing that kids had.
Mm.
And I started listening a lot to Dr. Russell Barkley and other YouTube videos, articles, ADHD websites, anything that I could, podcasts, anything that I could learn about. And it just got to this point where I was like, this just explains so much about my childhood, so much about my adulthood. Then I went and sought my own assessment and diagnosis and got pretty easily diagnosed.
Wow. And it's
Yeah.
so interesting because I hear this from so many late diagnosed women that they are pre-diagnosed with anxiety. I
Yeah.
also had that as well. And I'm curious, you sought treatment for your anxiety. And you said it didn't work. What type of
Mm.
treatment were you getting for that didn't work for you?
So it was just all I guess, the holistic stuff. So I never went down the medication route for anxiety. I just wanted to, at the time, I just wanted to try all the lifestyle things first. So I was getting out into nature more, into sun more, doing more sort of just walking, like sort of, I guess, grounding exercises.
Like
Um,
regulating your nervous system a little bit.
yeah, a little bit. As much as I knew, that's the thing. Like, I've done a lot more work around my nervous system now because I understand ADHD, but at the time, I didn't know all that. So it was just like, what can I do to just calm myself down a little bit more from this anxiety? One of the things that stood out for me was that my psychologist said, don't do the exercise that gets your heart rate up because that can increase your anxiety. Do more yoga and
Sure.
things like that. And I was like, that just doesn't make sense to me because it was the heart raising exercises that would calm me down. Whereas the yoga, my brain would just keep going. That wasn't calming for me. So that was one of the things that I was like, this, as much as this makes sense, there's just some things that, aren't quite right with this. So it was that kind of stuff that, as much as I did that and it was nice, it didn't help with the other symptoms that turned out to be ADHD symptoms.
Yeah. So do you still have the diagnosis of anxiety?
Yes, I do. Yeah. So
Okay.
during when I got diagnosed with ADHD, they also diagnosed me with social anxiety and generalized anxiety as
Same.
well.
Same.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because the anxiety and ADHD, especially for women, are very complex and unique
Mm,
to treat. And we know that no two people, even though you and I have the same diagnosis,
mhm,
ADHD and generalized and social anxiety, doesn't mean you and I are going to treat it the same. And
mm,
if we tried treating it the same, doesn't mean that that would work the same for us. So
yep.
I find it fascinating when you are told, don't do high intensity workouts, do things that are going to be essentially mindful for you, but then your brain is all over the place. And I've heard from so many that don't take stimulants if you have anxiety because that might
Mm,
increase your anxiety with ADHD.
yep.
I do take stimulants. I'm not sure
Mhm,
if you treat your ADHD medically, but
yep.
there's just so many nuances.
Yeah. Yeah, there is. And now that I'm going through the process of the autism diagnosis, I am starting to question the anxiety diagnosis. I'm like, there is
Mm,
that anxiety there, but is it because of ADHD and autism, like the social anxiety? I know that in myself, if I just be myself and in a social setting, the social anxiety goes down. So, it's one of those things where it's like, yes, I get told I have social anxiety, but
Only when you're
if
masking.
if I'm just allowed to be myself, that kind of goes down. So it's like, well, is it really social anxiety, or do people just need to accept that everybody's different in a social setting? So
Ooh,
yeah.
that's really powerful. Can you tell me when you feel like you can be yourself in a social situation and when you cannot be yourself?
Yeah, I find that I'm more myself when I know that people are going to accept me. So, obviously, around my family, I've got a few friends that know about my diagnoses as well, and I know they're totally fine with it. And I can just relax a little bit more. So, if I suddenly tune out, or if I have to ask them to repeat something that they said because I don't remember because I was thinking about something else, like that's all okay. It's when I get into situations that I don't know the people very well, or I know that they're not overly accepting of ADHD and other diagnoses, that I tend to get that anxiety a little bit more. And I find myself, stressed, and I can feel it in my body. So, yeah, they're just a couple of examples of where that's shown up.
Hmm. I've spoken to different psychologists and psychiatrists who do not believe in generalized anxiety disorder or social anxiety
Mm,
disorder. And they think that
okay.
it's a function of your unmanaged ADHD or
Hmm.
trauma. So it's fascinating to hear that from you. You know, social
Mm,
anxiety should be social anxiety whenever you're in a social situation, but you're
mm,
saying that when you can be yourself, you don't have that social anxiety. So
yeah.
you're an expert in ADHD and you have a son with autism, and now
Hmm.
you're learning yourself how to manage that in a
Yeah.
way and what actually is going on with your brain. It's really
Mm,
fascinating.
it is. Yeah.
Yeah, and like so many parents, they know that they have ADHD and or autism because of their children.
Hmm.
Because as you mentioned, it's generally the boy in the classroom who can't sit still. And that is what the teachers usually diagnose first as a child with ADHD.
Yep.
So, anyway, you are also an accountant, Tina. Tell
Yes.
us about that. So, how did you shift from getting the diagnosis? I don't know when you started becoming an accountant, when you niched into being an ADHD accountant. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I've been an accountant for most of my career. So I, finished school, went to university, originally started actually studying economics because it was a business degree and you could do your different majors. And I started doing economics because I loved that at school. I've always loved numbers since I was a little kid. My favorite thing when I was a child to do was I had an older sister I have an older sister. She's 12 years older. So she used to do all these maths problems on my little chalkboard. And I would sit there for hours, just, it was just like over and over again. So I knew I always loved numbers. I decided not to do economics. So I decided to transition into accounting because I thought that would be more me. So I finished that. It was a real big struggle to get through university as well. So I wish I'd known back then that I had ADHD. It would have made it somewhat easier. Started working as an accountant, which again was really tough. Not only the social aspect of being around different people, but also I learned very quickly that as much as I loved the job, I struggled with sitting at a desk all day. I struggled with being on all day. So, working in accounting firms, like you do really need to have that energy to be on, not only with the work, but as I said, the social aspect, talking to people.
And that sustained attention too. No one is
Yeah,
meant to sit at a desk for 8 hours a day. And as an
exactly.
accountant, you're staring at a screen and spreadsheets, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And
that's right.
you have to sit and focus.
Yeah, yeah. And at the time, this was my first job was, gosh, I don't know, like 14? No, it would have been more. 17 years ago, I'm pretty sure my first job in accounting was. So back then, we didn't have a lot of the automations that we do now. So there was a lot of data entry, a lot of mind numbing, just sitting there, punching in numbers, which was really difficult. And that just made me sort of go from job to job because I thought, I don't fit in here. I'm going to try somewhere else. And now looking back, I realized that was just me not necessarily not fitting in. It was just, I can't sit here all day. and do the same thing over and over again. So I went from job to job, and eventually I just thought, you know what, maybe accounting isn't for me. I love the work, I love the job, but I can't sit at a desk all day and, be on all day talking to people who sit next to me and all that kind of stuff. So, which was really a bit of a sad moment. And I wish that I could go back and give myself a really big hug, because I didn't realize that, all those struggles were because I had undiagnosed ADHD.
Mm.
So after I had my second child, I kind of left for a bit. I left the industry. I was on maternity leave anyway, but I always missed it. I really missed the work. I missed talking to my clients. So I eventually got back into the industry, but again, it wasn't long before I started feeling the exact same way. And I was like, what is going on? Lasted probably another 3 or 4 years before, again, I left. And that was at the point where I had started on Instagram as well. So I'm like, you know what? I've got the opportunity to leave for a little bit and just see where this takes me. By that point, I knew that I had ADHD. I was diagnosed. I was recently diagnosed. And yeah, I had a bit of a break, which was really good. And then as my Instagram started taking off, people started asking me to help them with their business accounting and their
Ooh.
bookkeeping and their tax. And I was like, I'm not working in the industry at the moment. I can't help you. I wish I could. And that just kept coming in my DMs. And I was like, okay, there's obviously a need here. And straight away, my brain, being the ADHD brain it is, went into action mode. It was like, okay, what do I need to do to set myself up to help people? There's a need here. No, well, there's, in Australia, there's maybe two other firms that I know of that are sort of niched towards neurodivergence.
Accounting. Mm-hmm.
So I knew that there's not a whole lot of help for, ADHD people, other neurodivergent people. Yeah, so went into action and set everything up. Yeah, I started working for myself, and it was one of the best decisions I have ever made, because now I get to not only do what I love in the job, which is, all the numbers stuff and helping people, but I get to work my own way. And that's, looking back now, that's exactly what I needed from day one. I needed to work my own way, where I'm not sitting at a desk all day. I can get up early and do an hour of work before I go do other stuff and then come back to it. I can, go out and do my groceries in the middle of the day because I need a break. I can go take my dog for a walk. Like it's so good that I just wish I had done this earlier.
Totally. And it's so powerful what you're saying. A lot of these things are so powerful. And I can't wait for people to hear this message, because yesterday I was doing a webinar and people were saying, what are some ADHD friendly jobs? First of all, I don't know many ADHDers who like accounting or bookkeeping, but you love it. And you just didn't have the right environment. And that's what I was saying to them yesterday. Like, you might be really skilled and be lit up by a task or a job, but just not have the right boss, not have the right environment. You might need a small environment, a large environment, working for yourself, all these different things. So it's not always the job itself. It's everything else that comes with it.
Yeah, 100%. And, I see people ask that all the time. And that's one thing that I wish people would know, is that we can do anything that we love, as long as, yes, we do enjoy it and we have the right environment. And if that's, I know some accountants who do have ADHD that are successful working for somebody else in a firm. So again, we're all different. Like, just because you've got ADHD doesn't mean that environment isn't going to suit you. It's just understanding what is going to suit you and, go down that way.
Yeah. So you learned that you can help people in the ADHD community. How do you help them as an ADHD accountant?
A lot of the businesses and individuals that I work with in my firm are, neurodivergent in some way. And there's, lots of different people, which I really love, different backgrounds, which is really amazing. But I do also help people with their finances through financial education, financial consulting, because that was one of the other things that came up very quickly once my Instagram started to take off, was that ADHDers feel a lot of shame around their money.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of questions around that as well. So being able to help people with that is really amazing as well. Just also seeing their journey. I've had some one-to-one clients as well, and just seeing their journey from, A to B and being a lot more savvy with their finances and feeling a lot better about them is just so amazing.
How do you, I get this question all the time, how do I budget? I've never looked at a budget. Where do I start? What would be some pieces of advice? I know you have a book coming out too that you're working on. What
Mhm.
would be some like just straight up start here if you need to start a budget?
Yeah. Um, Gosh, this could be a podcast in itself, so I'll try to make this a bit more succinct. To me, it's really twofold. So you've got the external things and you've got the internal things. So yes, the external things is understanding how you can budget with your neurodivergent brain. That may look very, very different to the typical advice that's out there at the moment. The typical stuff is do this really fancy budget and budget for every dollar and everything goes, somewhere. Whereas for somebody with ADHD, it might just be as simple as starting with understanding where you're spending, which can be, I know that sounds very easy, but for a lot of people that's really difficult. Again, which typical financial advisors and financial coaches and consultants don't understand with ADHD is that even just knowing, looking into our bank account can use a lot of mental energy. But understanding
Absolutely.
where your money is going can be really powerful. And, just automating some bills and understanding when those bills are due. It's not necessarily building out this amazing budget. Often that's a lot of steps down the track. But often that's where people start. They start with the budget before they understand everything else. And often that's why we struggle to stick with them because we're like, well, I'm spending all this money that's not in my budget. So therefore I'm failing. And it's not that people are
Mhm.
failing, it's just that you started at step 6 when you should have started at step 1. So it's bringing it
Isn't
right
that
back.
the thing? Always.
Yeah.
It's that 1% rule of action and knowing where to start. You're not going to run the
Mm,
marathon. You got to put on your sneakers first. But
yeah.
all we
Yeah.
see is, I need to be $10,000 less in
Yep.
spending this month or whatever.
Yes. Yeah,
That's
exactly.
great.
100%. Yeah.
That's great.
So that's the external stuff, but then there's also the internal stuff about, understanding, where you do get triggered around your finances, what triggers the spending, dealing with the shame that you might feel around money. So, all these internal things, which if we don't tackle that as well, that can come out in the spending. It can come out to, not sticking to your budget, not being able to earn more money in your job or your business. So it's really twofold that we need to look at both things in order to achieve financial wellness.
100%. So, like, breaking free from a scarcity mindset, what's holding you back
Mm,
there?
yeah.
And then, so like having that mindset shift along
Yeah.
with actual tools on knowing where you're
Yes.
spending your money.
Exactly.
Do you recommend apps like Mint or Honeybooks or QuickBooks to have an easier understanding of what you are spending?
Yes, if that works for the person, I am all for that. Some people love apps, some people don't like them. It's the same with spreadsheets. Like a lot of budgets are on spreadsheets these days. Some people, love that kind of thing. Some people don't even want to open a spreadsheet or look at it. So definitely, if the apps work for you and it helps you categorize your spending and it helps you look into it, sometimes apps are a little bit less daunting than actually going into your bank account to look at spending. So it's definitely worth trying. And that's the thing. I always tell people it's worth trying. And if it doesn't work for you, that's okay. You haven't failed. It's just that something hasn't worked for you. Go on to the next thing.
Yes, I love that. Don't get stuck on what's not working. Try to think
Yeah.
about the other options and having that growth mindset.
Yes.
So, popular term, we've all heard it, is ADHD tax. Where do you see within your outreach and
Hmm.
you looking at spending that, you know, is a common thing for individuals with ADHD to forget about or, have that ADHD tax?
Forgotten subscriptions is a big one. people subscribe to stuff and they forget to cancel during the free trial, and either they don't realize because they don't go into their bank account and have a look what's coming out, or they do realize and they feel too much shame to go cancel it, or that's a lot of steps to actually go cancel it. So I've been in one-to-one coaching sessions where I've sat with the person and we've gone through their subscriptions and cancelled them together. So that can be really helpful for people as well, is that if you're struggling with something like that, do some
Mm.
co-working with somebody else. And while you're in that, or body doubling, I should say, while you're in that body doubling session, go through and have a look at your subscriptions and cancel them, because that is one of the biggest ADHD taxes that I see with people. Other than that, there's, late fees for not paying bills on time, late fees for not taking library books back, for example. And then, the forgotten food, because you've bought food, you've put it in the fridge, forgot about it, or didn't feel like eating it. So, you've got all these
Yep,
food,
the
all this fresh food that
perishables.
you've got to chuck out.
Mm.
So they're the biggest ones that I see pop up all the time.
Yeah, and I know not everything is solved with apps, but there are
Mhm.
some apps out there that help you see what subscriptions you have. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think there is. I don't personally use any of those, but I do know that there are apps that help you see where your subscriptions are. I tell people a lot to, first step is to look at your Apple Store or Play Store, whatever phone you've got, because often that's where a lot of the subscriptions are. You subscribe to these apps. So, if you're struggling with something like that, just first step, just go onto that subscriptions app on your phone and just see what's in there. There could be, quite a bit that's in there coming out per month that you might not realize. So, yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to be really vulnerable here. I had such a
Mm.
hard time creating a membership in my coaching practice because of that very thing, the ADHD tax.
Yes.
And I wanted to be very intentional with people about spending on things that they legitimately want. That's why I generally don't have people pay for in advance.
Mm.
However, not everyone could afford our services. So I had to start a membership,
Hmm.
but I probably do this in a way that's not beneficial for me, but hopefully for the client. I literally check out like who's coming to these sessions, who's not, and who's still paying month after month. And I'm like
Mm.
personally sending them an email like, hey, what's happening here? You're not coming to these sessions and you're still paying. And so often I get, that's okay. It's worth it. I want to pay. Like, what is that? I'm just so curious about it. Like, are they feeling bad? Are they getting value? And then sometimes I just take it upon myself to actually just go ahead and cancel them because I don't want them spending the money if they're not using the services.
Mm. Yeah. Wow, that's really, I've never heard someone say that before with their membership. I absolutely love that. And yeah, you're right. It could be a few different things. They really might be getting the value out of it. They're just not in there a lot. And I think it's one of those things where, if you can kind of see people trickle in every now and then, it might be the fact that they do really value it. So they're happy to pay. But yeah, I mean, there might just be people that, not that I'm saying they don't see the value, I'm sure they absolutely do. But of course, there might be people that are like, well, that's all I've ever known, to just keep paying for memberships but not use it. And that's, in a way, that does feel almost okay because it's what we've known for a really long time. But I find that really, really interesting. And I love that you're proactive with that, because yeah, it might just be that some people just feel a lot of shame to say, actually, I do need to cancel because I can't afford this at this time, or whatever it is.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think someone like you or a coach or a mentor or a friend, that's where we really come into play with that one-on-one guidance and giving that person the space to like see what's important, what's not. When I first started my coaching business, I had so many different CRMs because I didn't know which one to use. I had Kajabi, I had Wix, I had Active Campaign, I had Coach Accountable. I was
Yeah.
paying these monthly fees and I wasn't
Mm.
utilizing everything to the max.
Yeah.
Finally, after like thousands of dollars of mistakes, we finally put everything onto Wix and Active Campaign, but that
Mm.
it didn't really take much work to do it. But to stop
Mm.
yourself as an ADHDer and say, let me actually look at this from a metacognitive
Yeah.
view and not spend this like money on the same things. It's
Yeah.
hard. It's really
It is
hard.
hard. Yeah, it is hard. And I'm fully transparent with people. Like, even though I work in this space, I still have ADHD. So I get it. Like, I'm not somebody who's come into this space and go, oh, this is also easy. Like, why aren't you doing this? It's easy to cancel stuff. It's easy to look at your finances. Yeah, it's 100% not that easy, but some things are. I totally understand. And even myself, like, I still get myself into these situations where I have been paying for stuff for months and haven't used it, or I struggle to cancel things. I've got one thing that I need to cancel at the moment, but I have to call them to cancel
Mm,
it. And I'm like, why?
that
Why can't I just cancel this
initiation.
online? Yeah, the
Oh,
initiation. And I know that once I call, it will be so simple, but it's that step to actually call them and go through those steps of saying it out loud that I want
yes.
to cancel this, and then they're probably going to ask questions and I just want to cancel it. And yeah, it's hard. And I still do, the impulsive spending. But I'm much more, these days, I'm much more aware of it, and I know how to get out of that spiral. And that's what I hope to teach people. It's not that you're never going to impulsively spend before. It's not that you're never going to forget subscriptions. You've got ADHD, this is going to happen, but it's getting out of that shame spiral. It's getting out of that spending
Yes.
spiral that is super important rather than trying to be perfect.
100%. There is no such thing as perfect, right? And if you
Yeah.
continue to try to achieve perfectionism, literally, it's funny. I was listening to Gary Vee this past week, and he was saying people who try to be people pleasers or perfectionists, it's because one or two reasons. One, you don't want to grow, or two, your
Mm.
ego is telling you that you could do it better than someone else, like as a business. So
Oh, I
I
love
never
that.
thought about it from that perspective before, but it's so true. Like when
Yep.
we can't get something out or whatever, we think, it's not just what other people are going to think. It's about we think that we can do it better sometimes. And we don't want, yeah.
Yeah,
Mind
that's
blown when I heard that.
that's really interesting. I love that. That's something that I've actually learnt recently about, our ego and things like that, and how much it does play into things. It's super interesting, and I definitely want to do more research and looking into that because it's so, yeah, it is. It's mind blowing.
Yeah, yeah. I love how you mentioned the impulse spending too. In my book, Activate Your ADHD Potential, one of the steps is managing your dopamine because with ADHD, you know that our
Hmm.
dopamine levels are above baseline or below baseline. They're not getting that consistent drip like a neurotypical.
Yeah.
And very often people can't take medication or their medication wears off. So they need to find ways naturally to regulate their dopamine. And impulsive spending is going to give you that rush of dopamine that very often we don't have
Hmm.
when we're overwhelmed. That's why we go and we buy all these subscriptions and we go on Amazon and put things in our cart. And
Yep.
so, how do you help people recognize? Because you said there's no such thing as perfectionism, but how do you
Hmm.
help people recognize when they are impulsively spending and how to help them manage it a little bit?
Yep. I help people recognize when they're doing it when they can feel those urges. So they can feel those urges to buy things or buy something that they hadn't thought about before. Sometimes, and sometimes, look, sometimes that's okay. Sometimes it is okay to just get that dopamine hit from spending if it's within your budget, if it's something that you probably are going to use. I definitely don't shame people for, doing things like that, but recognizing those urges and also recognizing the triggers as well, and then understanding when that's starting to spiral. So it's very different to being like, it's Friday afternoon, I'm done with work, I just need that dopamine thing, I'm going to quickly impulsively buy something, and then walking away from the computer and you're done with it. But then you've got the spiral where it's like you can't stop. So it's like, I've bought something great, I'm going to keep going. Often for me, that happens when I'm at the shops because I don't know, it's just something about, I don't know what it is, it's the environment. And I will
That
just go from shop to shop.
stimulus.
And then suddenly I've got all these bags. I'm like, I've got to go to the car because I'm not going to stop here. I need to stop myself in some way.
My bags are not going to fit in the car. I'm going to have to put the bags on top of the car.
Yeah. When I get to the point where I tell my husband, hey, can you just carry this? I'm like, okay, I'm done now. But yeah, it's recognizing those sorts of things when it's like, okay, this is starting to spiral out of control. There's been something that's triggered you. You can feel those urges to keep going, and then you do keep going. You notice that, you have started to buy quite a bit. So it's kind of recognizing those sorts of things to be like, okay, this is starting to get out of my control, then, putting the things into place to sort of stop that happening.
Wonderful. What would be the one thing that you would want people to know listening to this podcast to help them manage their ADHD and finances?
Reaching out for help, I think, is a really underrated thing to do, because people often feel a lot of shame to reach out and be like, hey, I'm actually struggling with this, to either vocalize it or to write it in an email or, a message to somebody's social media. That takes a lot of courage, and it takes a lot of mental energy to be like, I'm actually going to tell somebody else that I'm struggling with this. But often that can be such an amazing step, because getting that support around, whether it's just your ADHD or, as well as your finances, can be so amazing, because you can start to understand, as I said, those triggers. You can start to understand those urges and recognize them, and you can really start to get a picture of what's going to work for you. There's a lot of noise on social media, and some of it's great. Some of it does work for a lot of ADHDers, but there's a lot of things that I've noticed that don't, and we can spend a lot of time having a look on social media and finding things that work for other people. And again, when we start trying a lot of different things that don't work, we start to think that, perhaps we're failing or nothing's going to work. Yeah. Whilst that's good to try different things, it's also really good to get an understanding of what your individual, triggers are, what your individual ADHD looks like, so you can work with somebody to, get some help quicker.
Yeah, my husband always says this: you're going to pay one way or another, with time, energy, failure, or you pay someone to help you see things quicker and get unstuck. And not everyone is there yet. Sometimes we need to fall flat on our face and try a million different things until we get to that point of emotion where we're like, oh, I need help. But yes, you're going to pay one way or another. And I also want to just say one quick thing. Every time I ask this question to anyone who comes on the Successful with ADHD podcast, what's one thing? They can never say just one thing. It's always like 2, 3, 4 things. So anyway, maybe I need to change around the question. But Tina, thank you so much for coming on and waking up early in Australia. If people want to get help for their finances and get accounting help, where can they find you?
So I always tell people the best place is my Instagram, which is at the ADHD Accountant, because that will give you links to basically everything else. I do have a website that you can go to, which is adhdmoney.co. I had to think about that for a second. But as I said, if you go to my Instagram, you'll find all those links. And, it'll link to also my accounting firm here in Australia, if anyone is in Australia. And I'd love to chat to people.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on the Successful with ADHD podcast and helping us manage our money, our finances, and giving us these quick tips today. I'm sure a lot of people will be reaching out to you shortly.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed our chat.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Successful with ADHD. I hope it helped you on your journey. And if you need any additional support for you or a loved one with ADHD, feel free to reach out to us at coachingwithbrooke.com and all social media platforms at Coaching with Brooke. And remember, it's Brooke with an E. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.